patent attorney, and I've been dealing with patents since 2001. So when I saw this whole Nintendo claims a way of summoning characters to fight for you, I thought to myself, holy hand grenade, how is that possible? Because I remember playing EverQuest back in the day when it first came out, and what was that, like 99? Talk about dating yourself. And I had a necromancer, and as long as there were 2 bone chips in my bag, I could press a button, and my BFF at the time, Mr. Femur, would pop up the skeleton, and he'd go fight creatures for me. It sounded like the exact same thing. And the first rule with patents is you can't claim something that's already been done. That's just the way it works. So I knew, like, at least for the last 26 years almost, this type of invention, this type of technology already existed. And I started thinking to myself, like, what is happening? Did the Patent and Trademark Office get this wrong? I mean, did the examiner completely miss the ball here? Well, I mean, that would be pretty ridiculous because the PTO never makes a mistake. Well, I wanted to find out what was going on, so I pulled up the patent and I read through it, and let me tell you, this thing is worthless. If it wasn't for the existence of Power World, this patent would have no value. It is so narrow and so limited, I would be surprised if any other game in the world, other than one of Nintendo's, actually this covers one of Nintendo's own games, Pokémon Scarlet and Violet, Let's Go Battle Technology, it does cover that, and I think that's actually why Nintendo filed this thing, is for that specific game and that specific mechanic. It just happened that Power World came along and used something similar to that. And let me tell you this, Nintendo hates Power World. I mean, they are off of Nintendo's Christmas card list. If Power World had a house, Nintendo would be wrapping it in toilet paper right now, because their game looks and feels so similar to Pokemon that it's just not even funny. I mean, just looking at the two, it'd be hard to tell them apart. So Nintendo's doing everything they can to try to sink the boat of Power World. And through patents, through this whole patent filing, this patent suit, that's the number one way they can do that. That's the number one option for shutting down someone else's technology or someone else's product, is to file a patent suit against them. So I want to show you the Nintendo patent and explain how to read a patent, first of all, but show you exactly what it claims. And we can see together, like, this thing is so narrow that no other game in the world has to worry about it. And it's just really not that big of a deal. All right, let's dive in. Now, if you ever want to take a look at a patent, there's a couple ways to do it. First, you can go to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office's website, where you click on their patents tab, boop, and then you search for patents. Yay, there it is. You go right there, and then you do a basic search, and then you can pull up the number. And I just happen to know what the patent number is from news reports and other sources. Let's put in the number. There it is, search. And then down below, you can scroll and you can take a look at it and even download the PDF. I like working with PDFs. It's just what I'm used to. I know it's totally old school, but the 2-column format is what I've seen before. That's the hard way. Let's take a look at the easy way. The easy way is you simply go patents.google.com, there it is, and you pull up Google's portal to the patent database. This thing covers the entire patent database, is refreshed very frequently, and I guarantee you every single patent practitioner out there uses this to some form or another, because it's so simple, so straightforward, and very easy to read. So there it is. Now let's dive in. Let's take a look at what we see here, and I'm going to start off by telling you all the stuff you can ignore. The title here, storage medium, information processing, all that stuff. Oh my gosh, that's a mouthful. That means nothing. Nothing whatsoever when it comes to the actual invention. Practitioners, patent agents, patent attorneys, and anyone that writes a patent tries to be as utilitarian and generic as possible when they come up with the title. You have to have one. So that, I don't even want to bother trying to figure out exactly what that means. Next, we've got the abstract. Throw that away. Also junk. You don't need to know what it is. The abstract is only useful for searching databases, and if someone is scrolling through a whole bunch of different patents just to get a quick idea of what's going on. But for what the patent actually claims, useless. Now let's scroll down. Next, we've got the cross-reference to related applications section. And this appears sometimes. It's interesting because it tells you what the priority date of a patent is. In other words, when it became effective. And if that section exists, you have to take a look at the date within that section to see when this patent first became enforceable. And here we've got August 16, 2022, and it relies on a Japanese patent application. So what's happening is this US patent, the 397 patent, is in fact relying on the filing date of a Japanese patent that was filed on August 16, 2022. So that means anything that came after that 2022 date could be covered or could be infringing this patent. That's the patent's, that's its startup date. That's when it started working for Nintendo. Think of it that way. If it doesn't exist, if you don't see this, that means the patent has to rely on its own filing date, which is 2023-3/1, so March 1st of 23. That's when this application was actually filed by Nintendo. And most of the time, if a patent is going to claim a priority date to something else, like a previous application or a provisional patent, it has to be within 1 year. Now, let's take a look. Next, we've got the background and summary. This section tells you a brief summary of what the invention is, as well as all of the stuff that came before, like how summoning in video games worked before this invention. Throw it away. You don't need to know that. This is an artifact of when patents were paper only, and practitioners wanted to know what led up to the invention. But for our cases, it's junk. You don't need to know this. Okay? So already you can see how much useless information is in a patent. They look daunting, they look terrifying, but when it comes down to it, there's a lot of stuff here you just don't need to read. Next, after this section, we've got the brief description of the drawings. And what that does is that's simply going to tell you what each drawing is. Hey, what you see is what you get. You want a brief description of the drawings? Here's where you look to get a brief description of the drawings. And any good patent, any decent patent will come with anywhere from 1 to 5 to 10 to maybe even 20 different drawings, because drawings help to support what's being claimed. Now we're going to move on. Now we've got the detailed. This here in this patent is called the Detailed Description of Non-Limiting Example Embodiments. Wow, someone felt the need to dress that title up. It's usually always called the Detailed Description of the Invention. Simple. Why they had to change it? I don't know, but they decided to. I mean, it makes them sound pretty smart though, right? This section, don't throw it away, but on the same hand, don't read it. Think of this as like the dictionary or the encyclopedia to help you understand what's being claimed. And with that segue, we're now going to turn to the claims themselves, because the only part of a patent that actually matters, that actually tells you what's being grabbed by Nintendo in terms of technology, are the claims. And they're numbered. And they're in the section called, yeah, you guessed it, claims. They might be called something else, like what is claimed. It's always called claims. What am I saying? Always. It is always called the claims section. And the way claims are written is that the broadest, most powerful claim is always first. And then as you work your way down, you've got the less important, more narrow claims later on. So in theory here, when we start looking at this, the very first claim is the most broad claim. And really that's all we need to focus on. Now, before we go on, let me explain how claims work. A claim is made up of a whole bunch of different elements. In other words, parts that make up this claim. And every single part of a claim, without exception, has to exist in someone else's product in order for that product to be infringing on the patent. If even one single tiny little element doesn't exist, there's no infringement. All right? Throw it out. So if a claim has 100 different elements, well, first of all, it's pretty useless. If only 99 of those elements exists in Pal World or whoever we're talking about, there's no infringement. But if 100 out of 100 elements read onto, they call it reading onto this other product, then yes, there's infringement. That's the way it works. So let's start looking at the elements of the Nintendo patent, because when you start reading that, it's crazy. It's crazy limited. And I'll show you what I mean. No other game has to be worried about it. So let's start off. The very first element, we've got a non-transitory computer-readable storage medium. And the nice thing here is that Google kind of breaks them down into what each element is by providing spaces. Good rule of thumb is when you see a space between a sentence here on Google Patents, it's usually a separate element. But anyway, this non-transitory computer-readable storage medium, having stored therein a game program, let's take a time out, talk about how software patents work. A software invention can't just be an abstract set of ideas. You can't just say, step 1, summon a character. Step 2, have the character fight. Step 3, have the character come back to the character's owner or something like that, or a pet or whatever. Case law says that in order to be valid, a software patent has to cause a physical change within a computer. So whenever you read a software-related patent, you're going to see this type of language where a set of instructions causes a physical change within a computer or within a computing device or memory or whatever. Otherwise, it's not patentable. So that's why you're going to have all this computer-readable storage medium stuff. And without it, the patent won't be granted. So let's dive back in and see what we've got going on. We've got a non-transitory computer-readable storage medium. You know what that is? Memory. That's all it is. Non-transitory, which means it doesn't change. But honestly, it could be RAM. It doesn't say how long it doesn't change for, and RAM changes all the time. Or it could be a hard drive, or it could be ROM, or whatever. They didn't define what that is. They didn't specify because they're trying to keep this as broad as possible. So we've got memory having stored within it a game. All right, that's the first element. Then this game program causes a processor of an information processing apparatus. Now, the game causes the processor. Now, what that means is this game, the set of instructions that comprise this game, causes an information processing apparatus. What is that? That's a processor, all right? It's a CPU, could be a GPU, could be a specialized little chip that only executes game programs. It could be something inside of a PS5. It could be something inside of a computer. It could be something inside of your phone, whatever. Just any processor that can execute a game program. See how this works now? They try to keep that hardware language as open and as broad as possible to capture as many infringers and as many devices as they can within the language. So we've got a memory with a game program wherein the game program causes a processor to do something. Now, what does the processor do? It performs control of moving a player character on a field in a virtual space based on a movement operation input. And I'll admit, this is a little bit more complicated language. We've got kind of two things going on in this claim. First, the processor has to control the movement of a player character based on movement input. In other words, like you or me, any sort of player, we hit our controller, we tap on a keyboard, we look around with our eyes, whatever, however you're interfacing with the game. We give the CPU some sort of movement input, and then the processor takes that and through the game software causes a player character on a space, like within a space, to move somewhere. In other words, I'm telling the game, I want my character to move. The character moves. That's where we are so far. All right. Whew. Now, when an enemy character is placed at a location where a sub-character is caused to appear, what's a sub-character? Well, I'll tell you, if you go back to that detailed description of the invention, that section that I told you that was the encyclopedia, it will define the sub-character as being something like a pet or something like another character within the game that's going to help you fight. That's what that is. So what we're saying is when an enemy character, like a mob, is placed, and it doesn't say by who, so it could be by another player if you're like in a co-op or like a PvP mode or battling someone else online or whatever, or it could be placed by the game itself at a location where the sub-character is caused to appear. And caused to appear means summoned. It doesn't say who causes it to appear, because again, they're trying to keep it broad, but the subcharacter is caused to appear somehow. So your pet, your familiar, whatever you want to call it, your creature appears, okay? And if the enemy character is within that same spot, then we move on. Now, this next part, controlling a battle between the sub-character and the enemy character by a first mode. Whoa. What's that first mode? Whoa. Okay, that's a very interesting limitation because that implies there's going to be a different type of mode. Anyway, what this statement says here is that the controller, which is controlled by the game, is going to control a battle between your pet and the enemy character according to a first mode. And that first mode could be a combat type of situation, or it could be a barter type of situation. But since it says a battle, we know this is going to be some sort of battle mode. All right, that's what first mode is. It's a first type of battle mode in which the battle proceeds based on an operation input. An operation. So the battle has to be based on an operation input, and the operation input is exactly what it sounds like. It's some sort of input. Where does it come from? I don't know. It could be from the player, it could be from the game itself, but some sort of input has to be made. And our input then controls that battle, all right? And, okay, now we're moving on. There's the word and. When the enemy character is not placed at the location where the sub-character is caused to appear. So in other words, now, the next element says that when your sub-character pops up, your pet pops up, or your familiar, or your own character pops up somewhere where there's no enemy, something else has got to happen. Has to happen, in addition to all that stuff we just talked about before. So if your character pops up where there's no enemy character, now we're going to start automatic control of automatically moving the sub-character that has appeared. In other words, that pet is going to be automatically controlled by the game to do something, and it's going to be, and the control is going to start wherever it popped up. All right, and we're just piling on stuff, aren't we? And performing control of moving the sub-character in a predetermined direction on the field based on a second operation input. In other words, the game is going to cause your pet, I'm just going to call it pet. That's what my skeleton in EverQuest was. It's easier for me to think about. I'm lazy. So we're going to say pet. And when your pet pops up where there's no enemy, the game's going to take control of your pet, move it in a certain direction, predetermined certain direction on that field, but that direction is going to be based on a second operation input. In other words, a second input from the player. And on the other hand, when the enemy character is placed at a location of a designation, controlling a battle between the sub-character and the enemy character by a second mode. Okay, we've got another element here. What in the world does that element mean, right? Okay, and when the enemy character is placed at a location of a designation, controlling a battle between. So in other words, if the enemy is somewhere else on this field, not wherever your pet first popped up and it goes immediately into battle, but let's say it's farther on down the field, the game is going to control the battle between the pet and the enemy by a second battle mode. And what that means is, however combat occurs whenever a mob is far off has to be different from how combat occurs when the mob is wherever that pet was first summoned. So we've got two situations here. We've got the summoning of a pet when a mob is right next to you. We've got a summoning of a pet when a mob is far away. And the game has to do a whole bunch of different stuff in between based on where that mob is. So if you take a look at that, like, where on earth are you ever going to see this again? Where are you going to see this in any other game right now? That's not how EverQuest worked. And I'll tell you what, that's not how any other game other than maybe Pal World and Pokemon Scarlet and Violet works. So let me just summarize what Nintendo has actually claimed, because by the time you see it here just kind of in person, there's no way that this is going to cause any problems for any other games. Let's take a look at this. Here's the summary of what this whole patent is claiming. Now, why is Nintendo using this particular patent as well as their mount patent against Palworld? Well, when large companies go after each other with bitter hatred and all the money in the world, they do one simple thing. The plaintiff, the company that's going after someone else, will sit down, they'll look through their multi-thousand patent portfolio database, and they'll look through what their enemy has in terms of products, maybe like with Palworld, it's one thing in specific that they really don't like, or if they're going after some other strategy, like trying to get this other company to agree to a licensing agreement for whatever reason, they'll look at all the products that this other company has, and they'll try to pull matches out of that patent portfolio that will read on anything the other company has. So Nintendo is just trying to pull up their best hits to go after Pocket Pair to get them to shut down Palworld. And it turns out, since this is what ended up in court, the summoning patent and the mount patent, which I'll take a look at in a different video, are the two best hits that Nintendo has to attack Palworld. And so that's what we've got going on here. We've got essentially a turf battle by two big kids in the playground fighting each other, and Nintendo's trying to force Pocket Pair either to turn off Palworld or to get them into a licensing agreement. I haven't read the pleadings. I don't know exactly what Nintendo's going after, and there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that will happen in terms of negotiations that we'll never hear about. But the bottom line is Nintendo wants to get money or to get Pocket Pair to turn off Palworld. That's what this is all about.